December 2nd, 1967. The skies over Hanoi. American F-4 Phantoms, the most lethal fighters on the planet. $2.5 million apiece. State-of-the-art radar. 6 air-to-air missiles strapped beneath their wings. Facing them, aging Soviet MiG-21S, 1/8 the cost. Primitive radar, 2 missiles. Pilots with a sliver of the flight hours their opponents had logged. On paper, this isn't a contest, it's an execution. But the Americans are the ones dying. Vietnamese pilots are knocking Phantoms out of the sky with tactics the Pentagon cannot decode. Strike from below, vanish into cloud cover, gone before the Americans even roll into pursuit. And at the dead center of this impossible equation, one man, Nguyen Van Cock, son of a rice farmer, 23 years old. By the close of 1967, he will have destroyed 9 American aircraft. That record makes him the most successful fighter ace of the entire Vietnam War.
How does a pilot strapped into an obsolete jet outfight the most dominant air force in human history? What did the Vietnamese figure out that America's best strategists could not answer? And how did the brutal lessons of these dogfights reshape aerial combat for every generation that followed? Nguyen Van Cock came into the world in 1944 in Nam Dinh province, 90 kilometers southeast of Hanoi. His father farmed rice paddies, his mother kept chickens. No one in the family had ever stood next to an airplane. Then in 1963, North Vietnam opened recruitment for its air force. He was 19. He signed up, not out of devotion to any cause. He wanted to fly. 500 young men applied. 30 made it through. He was one of them. In 1964, they shipped him to the Soviet Union, a classified training facility near Chkalovsky. This is where North Vietnamese pilots learned the MiG-21. The program was merciless. The MiG-21 was fast, razor-responsive, and utterly unforgiving. Top speed? 2,100 kilometers per hour. Combat radius? 480 kilometers. Once a dogfight started, you had 15 minutes of fuel. After that, you either turned for base or you fell out of the sky. Soviet instructors drilled one doctrine into their skulls. You will not survive a prolonged engagement against American aircraft. They carry superior radar, superior missiles, more fuel. So you hit fast, and you vanish faster. By late 1965, he was back in North Vietnam. Total time in the cockpit, 120 hours. American pilots rotating into Vietnam brought over 500 hours of flight experience with them. Nguyen Van Cock was unbothered. He had a tactic. He was about to test it against the strongest air force the world had ever assembled. The F-4 Phantom II was a beast. McDonnell Douglas designed it in the late 1950s for a single purpose: intercept and annihilate Soviet bombers before they reached American soil. It broke twice the speed of sound. It punched through 18,000 meters of altitude in under 2 minutes. Each airframe cost $2.5 million, roughly $23 million in today's currency. Its AN/APQ-72 radar system could track hostile aircraft at ranges up to 45 kilometers. It bristled with 6 AIM-7 Sparrow missiles, engineered to acquire and destroy targets beyond visual range, to kill an enemy pilot before he ever knew a Phantom was in his sky. This $23 million weapon was, by every metric, physically impossible to beat, except for one catastrophic design choice: no gun. The engineers were convinced dogfighting was dead. Air combat's future lived at long range. Missiles handled the killing. Close-quarters maneuvering belonged to the previous war. They were catastrophically wrong. When F-4 Phantoms deployed to Vietnam in 1965, American commanders radiated confidence. North Vietnam's entire air force amounted to maybe 40 planes, mostly aging MiG-17S, a small handful of newer MiG-21S. The US fielded hundreds of Phantoms, backed by the most experienced combat pilots on Earth. Total air superiority was expected within months. But Vietnam's war didn't unfold at 45 kilometers of clean separation. It happened inside clouds, at treetop altitude, in tight-range ambushes where radar painted nothing but static and missiles refused to lock. In that kind of fight, the F-4 Phantom wasn't untouchable. It was exposed. The Americans labeled it hit and run. The Vietnamese had a different name, guerrilla air warfare. The concept worked like this. American bombing sorties over North Vietnam moved along predictable flight corridors. Formations of F-105 Thunder Chiefs, heavy, bomb-laden attack aircraft, would push north from bases in Thailand. F-4 Phantoms would fly escort, holding formation above and behind. The Americans carried one decisive edge, airborne radar. That radar could pick up enemy aircraft at 45 kilometers. Plenty of distance to maneuver, reposition, engage. But the system had blind spots. Low-altitude targets vanished into ground clutter. Clouds swallowed the signal whole. The North Vietnamese understood both weaknesses and built their entire doctrine around them. Ground control made it possible. Across the country, a web of early warning radar stations went up, erected under Soviet guidance. These stations tracked American formations the instant they entered North Vietnamese airspace. Every reading fed into a central command post in Hanoi, codename Bison. Bison controlled everything. When the MiGs launched, what altitude they flew, what angle they attacked from. The pilots themselves made no decisions. They followed commands. The tactic worked like this. MiG-21s would scramble and immediately drop to low altitude, 500 meters above the ground, sometimes lower. Radars dark, engines screaming in silence on American screens. The MiG-21 was compact. At that altitude, on American radar, it registered as nothing, just more ground clutter. Bison tracked the enemy through ground-based radar and vectored the MiGs into position. The fighters would tuck behind cloud banks or nestle behind ridge lines, waiting. Overhead, American pilots flew steady, scanning clean radar screens with full confidence. Then Bison's voice. Climb and attack. The MiGs would wrench into a vertical climb, afterburners lit. They'd punch through the clouds directly beneath the American formation. Inside that radar dead zone, the world's most advanced fighter jet was blind, completely exposed. The F-4's AIM-7 Sparrow missiles needed time to acquire a lock. At close range, in a sudden vertical ambush, there was no time. The MiG-21's K-13 Atoll missile had an effective range of just 3 kilometers. Lock-on time, 2 seconds. Fire, roll inverted, dive back into the clouds. Gone before the Americans could process what happened. Total engagement window, 60 to 90 seconds. On paper, the concept was flawless. But combat isn't paper. Could a farmer's son with 120 hours of flight time pull off this maneuver against the most rigorously trained pilots on Earth? November 28, 1966, 2:14 p.m. Gia Lam Airfield, Hanoi. Nguyen Van Kock has been flying combat for 18 months, 47 sorties behind him. He's squeezed the trigger in anger exactly 3 times. He hasn't hit a thing. Today, he watches the tactic prove itself for the first time. The alarm cuts through the air. American strike package, inbound. 12 F-105 Thunder Chiefs with 4 F-4 Phantoms riding escort. Course set north, straight for the Paul Doumer Bridge. A supply artery the Americans have been hammering for weeks. He sprints to his MiG-21. But today, he's not the trigger man. His flight leader is Nguyen Duy Q, senior pilot, 3 years in combat. Nguyen Van Kock flies wingman. His orders are simple. Hold Q's wing, scan for threats, absorb everything. Pre-flight runs fast. Fuel tanks full. 2 K-13 Atolls slung under the wings. Cannon, 60 rounds. Radio, functional. He buckles the harness tight. Engine start. The Tumansky R-11 turbojet screams awake. Then Bison crackles through his headset. 4 aircraft, launch immediately. Heading 180, altitude 500 meters, radar off. He doesn't hesitate. He never does. Ground controllers hold the full picture. He sees only what fills his canopy glass. They roll and lift off. Q leads. He slots in 2 seconds behind. They stay low, skimming over rice paddies, threading between villages. American radar sweeps medium and high altitude. Down here, the MiGs don't exist. Bison's voice returns. American formation, bearing 045, distance 40 kilometers, altitude 6,000 meters, hold current heading. He glances at his fuel gauge. 12 minutes. Maybe. Then he has to turn back. The MiG-21 was never built for endurance. Declassified Soviet technical manuals confirm the aircraft's internal fuel capacity allowed roughly 45 minutes of flight under standard conditions. Engage the afterburner, that number collapsed to 15 minutes, often less. American pilots knew this. If they could keep a MiG locked in a dogfight longer than 10 minutes, it would flame out or break off. The Vietnamese had zero intention of staying that long. Target, 20 kilometers. Begin climb. Afterburner. Q shoves the throttle forward first. He follows. The afterburner ignites. The MiG-21 rockets upward at more than 200 meters per second. G-forces crush them into their ejection seats. Peripheral vision collapses. Each breath becomes a fight. 5 seconds later, they punch through the cloud layer at 5,500 meters. And there they are, 4 F-4 Phantoms, 800 meters ahead, slightly higher, loose formation, eyes scanning forward and up, hunting for threats in every direction except below. Q's targeting system finds the nearest Phantom. A solid tone fills his headset. That American pilot still has no idea they exist. A 1984 US Air Force study on Vietnam air combat found that in 68% of MiG ambush encounters, American pilots received no radar warning before the attack began. The MiGs flew too close, too low, too fast for the F-4's radar to acquire them in time. Q doesn't wait, he fires. The K-13 Atoll missile drops off the rail, its motor flares white hot, and it streaks toward the F-4's exhaust trail. The American pilot spots it. Too late. He wrenches left, but the missile is already closing. The F-4 detonates. He watches it unfold, the fireball blooming outward, wreckage tumbling through open sky. The remaining 3 Phantoms scatter, heads snapping in every direction, searching. But Q is already gone, throttle cut, rolling inverted, diving back into the clouds. He follows, glued to Q's wing. The 3 surviving Phantoms wheel toward where the MiGs had been. By the time they get a lock, they're pointing at empty air. Total time above the clouds, 12 seconds. They level off at 500 meters, heading south. Fuel gauge blinking red. 4 minutes of flight remaining. Gia Lam Airfield sits 35 kilometers away. They touch down with 90 seconds of fuel left in the tanks. Ground crew is already waiting on the tarmac. They've been listening to the radio chatter. 1 kill confirmed. An F-4 Phantom destroyed. Q climbs from his cockpit. Calm, measured, professional. He's done this before. He climbs out of his own aircraft. His hands won't stop trembling. His flight suit is drenched through with sweat. Not fear, adrenaline. The raw, electric realization that the tactic actually works. He didn't squeeze a trigger. He was the wingman, watching, absorbing, cataloging every detail. But he understood something with absolute certainty. His turn was coming. That evening, Radio Hanoi announces the shootdown. No names mentioned. But inside the Pentagon, analysts are scrambling to understand what the hell just happened. Declassified US military records show that between September and December 1966, American forces lost 43 aircraft over North Vietnam. 8 of those were confirmed MiG kills. The loss rate was climbing. and accelerating. North Vietnamese MiG tactics were working. Nguyen Van Cock had just witnessed exactly how they worked, and the Americans weren't about to accept those losses quietly. After watching MiG-21S ambush their formations through November and December 1966, US military analysts started dissecting the pattern. The MiGs struck when F-4 Phantoms were tied to bomber escorts, distracted, shielding the slower F-105 Thunder Chiefs. But they refused to engage pure F-4 fighter sweeps, carrying no secondary mission. Colonel Robin Olds recognized the vulnerability in that discipline. Olds was a World War II ace, 13 confirmed kills against Luftwaffe fighters, 44 years old, aggressive, deeply frustrated. He'd been flying fighter sweeps over North Vietnam for months, and the MiGs wouldn't come near him. So he decided to force the encounter. Operation Bolo. The concept was elegant in its simplicity. F-4 Phantoms would masquerade as F-105 bombers. Identical flight paths, identical altitudes, identical radio frequencies, identical electronic signatures. North Vietnamese ground controllers would see what appeared to be a standard bombing run. Fat, vulnerable, predictable. But the moment the MiGs rose to attack, they'd find themselves face to face with the finest fighter pilots the US Air Force could assemble. January 2nd, 1967, 2:45 p.m. Olds leads 28 F-4 Phantoms toward Hanoi. They cruise at 4,500 meters, the standard altitude for F-105 strike packages. They transmit F-105 call signs. They trace the exact corridors bombers normally fly. Down below, North Vietnamese radar operators watch the formation crawl across their screens. Every signature reads like another American bombing run. Standard protocol kicks in. Scramble the MiGs. 16 MiG-21S launch from Phuc Yen and Gia Lam. Some of North Vietnam's sharpest pilots are among them. They climb toward intercept altitude, expecting sluggish, bomb-heavy aircraft flanked by distracted escorts. What they find instead is Robin Olds. 28 F-4s. A single objective: kill MiGs. The Vietnamese recognize the trap within seconds. Already too late. Olds owns the altitude, the speed, the positioning. The MiGs attempt their rehearsed doctrine: climb, fire, dive away. But there is nowhere to dive to. Phantoms fill every corridor. The next 12 minutes unfold like a massacre. Olds fires first. His AIM-7 Sparrow missile locks onto a MiG-21, tracks it, destroys it at medium range. His wingman claims a second, then a third. Vietnamese pilots break formation, clawing toward cloud cover. But Americans occupy every escape route. 7 MiG-21S destroyed. American losses, 0. Declassified US Air Force after-action reports confirm that Operation Bolo eliminated nearly half of North Vietnam's operational MiG-21 fleet in one engagement. It stands as the most successful air-to-air operation across the entire Vietnam War. A devastating strike against the North Vietnamese Air Force, but not a killing blow, because Nguyen Van Cock was never in that sky. He was scheduled to fly. His MiG-21 sat fueled, armed, and waiting on the tarmac at Gia Lam. Minutes before takeoff, ground control pulled him, reassigned to a different patrol sector. Some historians call it luck. Others believe the Vietnamese controllers sensed something wrong. The American formation was too clean, too disciplined. Whatever kept him grounded, it kept him alive. Operation Bolo forced the North Vietnamese into a different posture. Caution replaced aggression. No more large formations thrown at obvious targets. They waited now, watched for the precise moment American defenses stretched thin or lost focus. The core tactic survived, but its application grew surgical, more selective, more patient. The 921st Fighter Regiment stood down for 3 months, retraining, rebuilding. The Pentagon declared Operation Bolo a decisive victory. The MiG threat, they announced, was neutralized. But was it? Or had the Vietnamese simply learned to hunt differently? And when they returned to the sky, what then? April 30th, 1967 would answer that question. April 30th, 1967, 2:14 p.m., Gia Lam Airfield, Hanoi. 3 months since Operation Bolo gutted their ranks, and the 921st Fighter Regiment is operational again. The alarm cuts through the base. American strike package inbound. Nguyen Van Kock sprints toward his MiG-21. But something has changed. He is no longer a wingman. Today he flies number 2 in a 4-ship formation, his own radar lock, his own kill. They launch. Low altitude, clouds swallowing the aircraft. Ground control feeds them vectors, threading them into position. Target. 20 kilometers. Begin climb. Afterburner. He pulls the stick back, punches through the cloud layer at 5,500 meters. 4 F-4 Phantoms dead ahead. He locks the second aircraft. Fires. The F-4 comes apart in the air. He rolls, dives back into the clouds. Total time exposed, 12 seconds. When his wheels touch the runway, the ground crew is already gathered. 2 kills confirmed that sortie. Nguyen Duy Q claimed the other. But this time, Kock is the one whose finger squeezed the trigger. That evening, Radio Hanoi broadcasts his name to the nation, the farmer's son from Nam Dinh province. His first kill. Between April and December of 1967, Nguyen Van Kock flew 23 additional combat missions. October 3rd, kill number 2, an F-4D. October 7th, kill number 3, an F-105. November 18th, kills 4 and 5. 2 F-105s downed in a single sortie. Ace status confirmed. His face appeared on propaganda posters across the country. Radio broadcasts named him Defender of the Sky. School children memorized his story. But the Americans were memorizing it too. Declassified CIA reports reveal that U.S. intelligence analysts had begun building profiles on individual North Vietnamese pilots. Kock's call sign, Red 3107, surfaced again and again in after-action reports. He became a priority target. American pilots received specific briefings. If you spot a MiG-21 punching straight up through cloud cover, guns blazing at knife fight range, gone before you can react, that's him. Kill him before he kills you. But Nguyen Van Kock made that nearly impossible. He never lingered in a dogfight past 60 seconds. He never repeated a pattern. He never accepted a fight unless the math favored him. December 1967. Kills 6 and 7. December 28th, 1967. Kills 8 and 9. Double ace. 9 confirmed victories. The deadliest fighter pilot of the entire Vietnam War. He was 25 years old. After 1969, Nguyen Van Kock never flew combat again. The North Vietnamese grounded their best weapon, not out of fear, but foresight. They pulled him off the front lines to shape the next generation of pilots. He survived the war, retired in 2002 as Chief Inspector of the Vietnamese Air Force. But what this rice farmer's son set in motion rippled far beyond Southeast Asia. Operation Bolo and the MiG ambush tactics that nearly broke American air superiority, they forced a reckoning inside the U.S. military. The direct result, the U.S. Navy Fighter Weapons School, established 1969. You know it by another name, Top Gun. Turns out the dogfight wasn't dead, and a farmer's son, flying an outdated Soviet aircraft, had carved that truth into the fuselage of every American jet he burned out of the sky. If this kept you here, subscribe and leave a like. It genuinely makes a difference.